Peace, King. How you feeling?
Peace, peace, bro. How are you?
All is well. All is well. Thank you so much for stopping by on the platform. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate being invited. I'm trying to get my headphones on. And invited, and have the opportunity to participate, man. See what you got going on. Contribute what I can.
Definitely,
So, what's
definitely.
what's the word?
It's an honor. We're gonna get right into it. You did so much work behind the scenes. You've been doing it for so many years. For the viewers who just may not recognize you, you can let them know what your name is and definitely where you're from.
Well, my name is Cavario, Cavario H, and I am the Mind Plug. You know, I'm out of Harlem, New York. I am a retired gangster, uh, as class one narcotic offender. I got into the drug game when I was 13 years old, but I was born into it. My mother and father were class one narcotic offenders, and I come from an organized criminal family, um, born in the 60s, late 60s. And I made my way through that existence. I did everything you could do in it. I had everything you could have from it, and except for the things you don't want, And at the age of 30, I woke up one day in my home in Atlanta and decided that I wanted to do something else with my life. And it wasn't easy. It was very scary because I had never done anything else ever in my life. Never had a job. Dropped out of school in 10th grade, so I didn't know anything but what I was raised in and had been doing my life. But I believed that there was something else, and I had faith that that I could do something else, and that's what I did. And as we go further into the conversation, I'll share with your audience what it was that I did. After I walked away from the game. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Before we even go into it, I want to ask you about the Mind Plug Academy. What exactly is that?
So the Mind Plug Academy comes out of my practice, even when I was in the street, of sharing insights. And when I was on the street, people would refer to me as the consigliere because I was the guy that you came to if you were trying to get into a particular neighborhood, you want to open up and start getting money in a particular neighborhood somewhere. But you don't want to have problems. You don't want to have to get in there and try to be making money and beefing and shooting and all kind of shit. And you're trying to figure out a way to get in, get access to whatever that market is there without having conflict. So I was the guy that could give you those insights. I was the guy that could help you to understand how exactly to infiltrate into a particular space or area, whatever, even take it over without having to bust a shot necessarily. And if a shot needed to be bust, you know, um, being able to do it in such a way as to be strategic and not reckless, and to be counterproductive to your purpose, right? Because your purpose is to be able to get access to that market and get that money. Well, if you go in shooting, you ain't gonna be able to get that money. You're going to be hot. You're going to hot the spot up. And then you're going to, from the point that if you are able to successfully infiltrate into that space after using violence, now you have to use violence to maintain that space. And violence and money do not go together. Violence will stop your money being able to give people insights. And my ability to do that came from the benefit of the two generations of gangsters, hustlers before me in my home, not in my neighborhood, not outside, not around the block, in my house, my family, not other people's families, my family. And the reason I'm putting so much emphasis on that is because there are a great many people who think they're street people, and they're just really poor, ignorant people who come from neighborhoods that are underserved and undereducated, and they're acting out of desperation, and they don't have a clue. They might not have had no money, but they came up with plenty of church and plenty of regular people morals and ethics and so forth, whatever. And the bottom line is those ideologies and ways of thinking don't fit into the street. That's why so many cats fall short in the street. That's why so many cats lose their lives and lose their freedom, because they're trying to take their normal person development into a space where it does not apply. The kinds of things that a person who comes from a home where mommy is a working person, teacher or something, and daddy is a working person, a mechanic or cab driver, something like that. And they're church people, and they raise their children in church, and um, they monitor their children, and put emphasis on education and all the normal stuff, right? Those normalcies don't translate into what one has to be and how one has to think and operate in the street. That's why the majority of them fail. That's why the majority, I don't give a fuck if you made money for a couple of years or a few years, whatever, whatever. If you made money for 2 years, 3 years, most cats don't last that long, right? But if you make money for 2 years, 3 years, whatever, whatever, and then you go to prison for 20 years, you failed. 10 years, you go to prison. You made money for 2 years, went to jail for 10 years. You failed. If you went to jail, no matter how much money you made, you failed. No matter how long it took for you to recognize that everything you had been doing up until the point where you find yourself dead or incarcerated was leading up to you being dead or incarcerated. You weren't magically on your way to success and being well, and then all of a sudden ended up dead or incarcerated. You were already heading here. Because you did not know that, because you come from normal everyday working class people, and you were not given the type of tactical ideology and sociopathic type of mindset that you need to be effective in that lifestyle. You don't know. You think that what you're doing, based upon normal people thinking and normal people teaching, you think that that's going to take you where you want to go in an abnormal lifestyle. It doesn't work that way. And many people found that out the hard way. Worse is, many people went through the hardships and still never found it out. Those are your guys who go back and forth to prison. So
Yeah,
the Mind
fact.
Plug Academy is an outgrowth of that. The Mind Plug Academy is an outgrowth of me witnessing those kinds of things. I've been running around the streets since the late 70s. Um, I witnessed a lot of cats come and go. A lot. A lot. I've been around some of the most pronounced and profound and prolific gangsters that have ever played the game. This is a fact. So I've seen the best of the worst. I know what it took. Those guys were Jim Crow niggas. They came from a time and an era that made people different. You understand what I'm saying? Just like the people now are being made by their circumstances. They're making the choices they're making, developing the ideas that they're developing based upon the circumstances around their experience. Well, the Jim Crow era, prior to the uh, uh, what do they call it? The civil rights era, the way that people were being treated, the way our people were being treated back then, made them different. They were tougher. They were more practical. They were more realistic. They were more honest with themselves and their circumstances. And they made much sounder decisions with a greater degree of commitment. That's what made the ones who got into the revolutionary act of creating your own economic situation, which is what hustling was, is what getting into any type of illicit business was. The ones who made that decision, um, they were they were different. Those gangsters were different. Those were actual gangsters. You know, these cats have come about in the last 30, 35 years. Those are not gangsters. Those are not gangsters. Those are poor people responding poorly to poor conditions and circumstances that they don't really understand. So the Mind Plug Academy came about as a result of response to that. It's my response to that, to try to counter those conditions.
Wow. Okay. Okay. You dropped so much. Like you say, it's in like Harlem, at least from the outside looking in. You have the Harlem Renaissance. It's like this black mecca for knowledge and information. Then you had an era with the Malcolm and the civil rights movement. Then it kind of get to a point where it's Harlem is being known for the hustlers and the streets and even hip hop. Some of the best MCs ever have came out of that era. Did you see that transition? Like I said, going from maybe the civil rights to getting into the drug game. Like, how did the people in the community and the elements change?
Crack is a footnote. Heroin is as far as drugs and criminality and that economy that was created out of that, that changed a lot of our lives. It was before even heroin. It was the numbers business. It's gambling. It's a numbers business. So without the numbers business and the wealth that it generated, you don't have the rich drug dealers because they initially got their funding from the rich number bankers. They're the ones who had all the money. So the big drug dealers don't come without the big number men and women, like Madam Stephanie St. Clair. You know. So yeah. So what's your question specifically? Like, was I did I witness the impact of on the social fabric that was created by what I was born into? I was born in '67, so I was born into the beginnings of the civil rights movement, right? So by the time I became consciously aware of my environment, say 8, 9 years old, right? Um, the world had changed a whole lot from what it was just before I was born, right? But the majority of the people that I'm around in my home, they are of the era before. So regardless of what kind of changes had come about in terms of the social structure and so forth, they didn't buy it. They didn't. It wasn't like, it's all good. It was kumbaya now. Oh, okay, they don't look at us as niggers anymore. No, they didn't have that impression at all. They kept the same scowl and incredulous looks and attitudes that they had prior to the uh, advent of the civil rights movement that they had, before. They kept that same attitude, same energy after the fact, you know, and and that's what I grew up with. That's what I grew up with. So um, I was insulated from a lot of things because we had the wealth of the narcotics business, the heroin business. So a lot of the hardships and a lot of the aftermath of the um, all the things that the civil rights movement was fighting. So the redlining, the um, Jim Crow laws, and the just the poor treatment and undermining of melanated people in general. Um, I didn't experience that stuff. Um, Not just because the civil rights movement had brought about so many different legislation that it kind of changed the overt terrain of that, socially, but because I was insulated by people who were powerful and who had means, who had wealth. Right, my mother kept $1 million cash in the house, in the apartment. That we, you know what I mean? So, and that's the reality I grew up with. You know, so there were a lot of things that I only became aware of retrospectively when I grew into a young adult and got exposure to some of the historical, aspects of this country as it relates to us. And so, what I grew up in consciously and aware of as a personal experience was people now who had, I guess, a sense of, like, you got to consider this too. I'm from the north, so what 73 was to me in New York is not what 73 was to my cousins down here in the Carolinas, which is where I live now. I live in South Carolina, right? And so for me, as a kid who comes from rich, powerful drug dealers, um, I was not experiencing the aftermath of the civil rights movement in the way that my Southern counterparts were, and on multiple levels. One, we had money. Two, we're up north. So I grew up in what was the ideal outcome of the civil rights movement, where there was, no overt segregation or overt um, separation or imposition, that kind of stuff. So as far as I was concerned, that was a historical thing, and it it wasn't a part of my actual reality. Um, but as I came into an understanding of what had happened prior to my conscious awareness, I was able to put the conditions that I was experiencing directly into perspective, and help me to understand more about, well, why the older people in my family were the way they were, or the older people in my community were the way they were. And we did have community back then. We had common unity back then. We do not have common unity now. So I don't really use the word community as it relates to us as a collective. I'll refer to us as a collective, the melanated collective, but I don't miscommunicate the realities as I perceive them, that we have a community, which is, common unity. But I was able to look at those elders and um, put into perspective why they were, and even in light of the reality I was growing up with, where everything was cool, white people ain't bothering us, whatever, whatever, right? I was able to understand, once I came into a conscious awareness of that historical past, why they were the way they were, despite the experience that I was now sharing with them, because I'm now in the world, and they were still like, yeah, I know who they really are. I know who the fuck they really are. In my book, my first book, this is my autobiography, Raised by Wolves, right? In my first book, um, I talk about how uh, these people, the men and the women, they didn't smile. And when I was a little kid, 7, 8, 9 years old, whatever, they allowed me to be in their presence, um, under circumstances and in situations where children were not generally allowed. But for whatever reason, they saw something in me that they felt um, warranted development in anticipation of my inevitable participation in the thing, um, because it's what we did, right? So when I would smile in those circumstances, because I was so enamored with the fact that I was in this environment and there were no other kids around. When I was able to hear things or be allowed to be in earshot of things so that I could hear them, or be directly addressed in a manner that only adults were being addressed, that contributed largely to my sense of self, esteem, and value, and so forth. And, I felt like, I'm happy about this, so I might bust a smile. And they'll be like, the fuck is you smiling about? I'm a little kid. I have but so many different responses to, any experience I might be having, and as a child, in a child's condition, and having a child's, view of the world, and a good view of the world, because my life is good. I got everything I could possibly want. You know what I mean? I was getting wants fulfilled before I even had them, you know? Um, so I didn't understand, like, why I'm not supposed to smile, but I'm not supposed to smile. I get it. I'm not in this circumstance, and I'm not supposed to smile. And what they were doing was trying to prepare me for the world as they understood it. Post civil rights. But as far as they're concerned, that was just some facade shit. Just another game for the fork tongue white man is playing. That's all. You know what I mean? Um, and as we can see today, what's going on today, they were right. They were right. They never actually repented. Um, they never actually um, evolved, moved forward, um, were repentant in any way. It was never that. Whatever they ever did that was supposed to be in our favor was only in their favor, and only to the degree that it was in their favor, offered to us as some sort of token, pacification or something like that. But as this guy, as a result of, he was around during the civil rights movement, right? So he knows what has transpired, and he knows the majority of the people that he has as constituents um, don't know what transpired, because they are woefully undereducated or miseducated. And, even with him knowing what transpired, because he is educated to a reasonable degree. Yes, he's not a very bright person, but he is far from ignorant. Um, but even with him understanding or being aware of what transpired um, prior to civil rights and then after civil rights, whatever, he still has no problem showing his true position and ideas and um, intent. So they were right. They ain't changed at all, and that was the attitude and energy they were giving me. So um, I don't know if I answered your question. Um,
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I appreciate you breaking it down. Now I gotta ask you this. Obviously you done wrote books, but I can ask you, when did you develop this passion for journalism? And if you could speak about, co-founding and being the editor of Don Diva.
when I've always had a propensity for writing. I've always had a attraction to it. I just never knew that it was an odd thing or an uncommon thing. So even as a child, um, I like to write. Um, I'm an artist, a visual artist. I draw, paint, that kind of stuff, whatever, whatever. And so that was always a passion of mine, whatever. But equal to that was my passion for the written word. And because I grew up in a society in a community where there was not a tremendous amount of validation attached to um, education in general, for real, and writing in particular, whatever. I never really paid uh, as it turned out, my gift for writing. I never paid it any real attention. I enjoyed writing. I was the kid that when the teacher would say we got a writing assignment, that would excite me because I know I'm good at it. And it it always perplexed me how most of the class would respond. Oh, and I used to be like, what y'all don't like writing? Writing is, um, to the point where my first grade teacher in Harlem, my first grade teacher said to me when she collected a writing assignment from me, she said, You write well, Cavario, you could be a writer." And I didn't have any point of reference for nothing like that, right? As I explained, I, as a very, very young, small child, was being exposed and included into some very mainstream type, major adult shit that most adults weren't included in. So my focus was on that and being worthy of that and continually included in those types of things. That was, gangsterism. So when she said that, my response to that was a writer. Like, firstly, it was to me, it was like you might as well said she might as well have said you could be a fire truck. That's how it sounded to me. Like, like what the fuck is what are you talking about? I'm gonna be a gangster, and that was first grade, bro. And there was no such thing as rap. There would be no rap records for the next 6 years. It wouldn't be a rap record made. You know what I mean? Right? Because I think what you call it came out in '79. I think Rap is the Light came out in '79, and that is the first rap record, official rap record. And so I say that to say that my influences were not, again, external. My influences were from my home, not outside. Right? So I wasn't an accidental outcome of my geography. I was a deliberate result of my indoctrination. I was genetically engineered for gangsterism. And so, I didn't understand the value of it beyond my passion for it. And so, my becoming a journalist was never a conscious intention. And it, it just was like a result of, like most things, I made one decision that led to circumstances that led me to, choose between different things that resulted from the previous decision and the circumstances. So that previous decision led to circumstances. Those circumstances presented me with certain options. I chose from those options, and then that choice resulted in other circumstances that left me with then this choices of options within those circumstances and like that, right? Which is that's the course of life or whatever. But the issue with it is that it's kind of like it's all reactionary. It's not internally driven in terms of like I make a decision about something that I predetermined that I want as an outcome, and I'm now going to do the thing that gives me the opportunity to do that thing. This is reactionary. It's like, this happened or this was the circumstance. So based on that, I made this choice just based on that. And then that resulted in a condition that made me say, well, okay, now I'm here. What are my options here? It's like being in a pinball machine, right? And whatever you come into contact with, bounce off of it. You bounce off of it, and there's no particular direction you're going. You're just going away from the obstruction. And then you're going in whatever way you happen to angle at when you hit it. You're going to respond to that angle and going in that direction or that whatever. That's not decision making. That's not being in charge of yourself and your condition, your circumstances. That's just reacting. Most of us in the circumstances that we come from, typically, I don't know what your circumstances are, and I won't assume that they're mine or like mine because you have melanation in your skin. That's a common condition. Like people think there's like one universal type of melanated person, and that's ridiculous when it comes from being ignorant and underexposed. You think that whatever it is that you've been exposed to is all that there is, right? So when I decided, and I explained that concept to put this next piece into perspective. When I decided to get out the streets, when I decided to stop selling drugs, I did it as a result of being exposed to information that came out of books that I was reading. And so one book led to another book, led to another book, led to another book, led to another book. Each book gave me insights into different things, behaviors, attitudes, ideas, and so forth that I had and helped me understand where they actually came from. Most of what we do is not us. Most of what we uh, do is not, or think is not our thoughts, are not our thoughts, right? It's the people who are responsible for our development. It's the society in which we are being raised and, whatever's being hailed as valuable in that society. Um, you know, Autonomy and autonomous development, where you are inclined to make decisions based upon your own internal condition, your own feelings, your own thoughts, that's not really a common practice. People are generally the results of programs, right? Mama's program, daddy's program, family program, friends program, neighborhood program, that kind of thing, right? Because it's all about getting along. So when I expose myself to these different books and the various information that came out of those different books, um, it led me to make decisions. So I was basically responding to the impact of coming into contact with that information. Now, the difference between reacting to a random trajectory, you know, randomly being going in a direction, and then coming into contact with something that blocks you from going further in that direction, and thus as a response to that, now going in another direction. So the difference between that and what I'm explaining about the books and how the information in the books affected me and my trajectory was that, unlike that pinball in the pinball analogy, I was a conscious entity. So I was consciously deciding what I'm about to come into contact with as it relates to information. I'm consciously deciding I'm going to read this book and I have an intention to gain this degree of insight. But of course, there's going to be other degrees of insights that I'm not even aware of that this book encompasses that will have an impact as well. And then from that, I will not just react and respond to. I'm going to have a conscious awareness that's going to help me or enable me or empower me to make a conscious decision about where I will go next, as opposed to just bouncing off some shit and hitting the next thing that I come to contact with. Right. So all of these things are what led to me, one, making the decision to um, stop selling drugs. And then by way of making that decision, creating a whole other set of circumstances that enabled me to start considering other things, um, passions that I'd had, um, like writing. And I was writing 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 hours a day, every day. And those writings resulted in this, my first book. And I've written several books since then. But those writings, that material there, is what drove me, or is the result of introspection. It's the result of where the information that I was gaining from the books that I was reading uh, drove me in myself, and what I found in that internal um, mm, assessment, introspection. What I found in that introspection was catharsis first, the release of things. You know, catharsis is the release of things. You know, release of psychological and emotional burdens, essentially. All right. You know, waiting to exhale. You dig? And through that, through that introspection and the catharsis, um, I began to understand that, one, I had survived a life that most people don't survive, statistically, um, especially people who come from it like I come from it, right? People who, this is what your mother did, this is what your daddy did, right? This is what that generation, you know, did. Those people who were born in the 30s, you know, that you came up under. But then it's also what the people who were born in the 50s that you came up with did. The next generation behind them, right? So it's all you've ever known, and for you to step outside of all you've ever known is, it's tremendous. Couldn't have happened without the information, right? And so, what about the people like yourself, or people who come from circumstances or environments, at least neighborhoods like yourself? What about them? How will they ever know what you have essentially stumbled upon? This is what I'm asking myself. How can this information that has changed your life and changed your trajectory and changed your perspective of yourself, and thus your perspective of where you are in the world and where you can be, how can that, how can you convey that information to your contemporaries? And that is essentially where Don Diva came from. Not intentionally, though. It was never the intention to create a magazine. I'm a 10th grade dropout, and I stopped paying attention in ninth grade. You know, I went to school to, uh, get money, because I was selling drugs in school too, because I was completely, um, you know, subjugated by the idea of transaction and getting money. And I didn't understand that just meant that propensity towards business, and, commercial. Like I didn't recognize that. I thought, that this is what drug dealers do. And I didn't realize, no, this is what the world does. Like you did. Um, so I went to school just to, further my expertise. And, it was my time to pretend, at least, to be a kid, even though I was coming to school in alligator shoes and fur coats and, you know, gold and all that type of shit, whatever, 14, 15, 16 years old, wearing thousands of dollars worth of clothes to school every day, whatever. And so, it was my place to e- exert my fashion sense and, be myself type shit, you know what I mean? But, just so I can, get ready to open up my uh, my heroin, then what they called a shooting gallery, where people came to buy heroin and shoot heroin, stuff like that. Um, so when Don Diva came about, it was entertainment. It was about entertainment. It was about film and music. No magazine. It was literally Don Diva Entertainment. No concept of a magazine or idea about a magazine. And we made a promo for Don Diva Entertainment, the company Don Diva Entertainment. And the promo looked, I guess, like a magazine. And when I say looked like a magazine, I mean in the most basic way. It had a cover on it, and inside there were pictures. That's the degree to which it resembled a magazine. Outside of that, there was nothing magazine about it. And the more you know about magazines, the more you understand it. Nothing magazine about it. But a lot of people in the hood, because of undereducation, underexposure, lack of real inside understanding about most anything except the basics that they have to think about every day to survive, they don't know. They look at everything on a very superficial level because they have not been given the opportunity or the insight into depth, deep thinking, you know, critical thinking. So it's a publication with a cover and pages inside. It's either a magazine or a book. They don't have a concept of a pamphlet or a promo or that happens to have these components and these makeups. This it's a flyer. It's a very fancy flyer, but it's not a magazine. But people thought it was, right? And so, and all it was a bunch of black and white pictures of cats from Harlem and New York in general, who were out and about in this on the scene during the early 90s to latter 90s. That's all it was. So old drug dealers that had come and gone. Um, you know, Puff, when he was a party promoter, running around with a bunch of cats I know from Harlem, and they call themselves the same gang, and it was party promotions, whatever. Um, there's a bunch of nostalgia, a bunch of old pictures. Chrissy, Jim Jones' girlfriend, Chrissy, who was a very popular street girl back then. When I say street girl, I mean she fucked with all the drug dealers, right? So and she had a crew of girls who were like that, young, cute, poor girls from the hood, who just happened to be pretty, had exceptional, uncommon, features and so forth, fair complected, fair haired, what I'm saying, prematurely developed bodies, and poor and desperate, and around a bunch of predatory older guys who had money and were very prone towards, um, people who were easy to manipulate and take advantage of. Right? So, there was a lot of pictures of a lot of people from back in the days in this book, in this booklet. And I was running around Harlem, putting them in the barber shops, putting them in the beauty parlors, selling them, and recruiting people to sell them, recruiting popular hairstylists to sell them, recruiting popular barbers to sell them. And it was the perfect place to introduce the product, because it was the one place where people had the opportunity to kind of sit still long enough that they can, peruse some shit and look at it, whatever. Nobody really get their hair done, nobody getting their hair done. And that was how I was able to, uh, get proliferate that market. And it was Harlem, essentially, just Harlem. And one day I was on 145th Street and 8th Avenue in Harlem, called Sugar Hill, and I was at a bodega um, that's now a Bank of America. And a little homie of mine named Erie, his we call him 40 though. 40 walked up to me and said, "Yo, Bop, Bop is my street name. It's my family name, but I'm known in the street by that as well. Um, Yo, Bop, yo, I like that magazine, man. When y'all gonna do another one?" And this is December of '99. I was like, "Magazine?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, Don Diva Magazine." And when he said Don Diva Magazine, that was the first time I'd ever heard those three words together. And when he said it, I literally heard like a faint bell right here, back of my head. True story. Boom. Oh yeah, oh yeah, right. Yeah, next month, man. Next month. It'll be out at the beginning of next month. And that's how Don Diva Magazine came to be. Complete total accident, bro. No plan whatsoever. But think about it. How much of an accident is it? I've already had an aptitude for writing all my life. And in the last 2.5 years up to this point, right? Because I dropped out of the street in the summer of 97. We're now in December of 99. I've been averaging writing 8 hours a day, every day, solid, working on what became this, but was at the time my personal diary. And so, because a lot of the books I was reading were I read all the personal development and self-help books. And no matter who the author was or what their premise or basis of their information was, they all had one thing in common. They all encouraged journaling. So I journaled a lot, which is what that came from. And I journaled for hours because I understood the cathartic um, benefits of it. It was my therapy. I had a lot to be therapized about, right? Um, so I'm writing 8 hours a day already. Um, I am still looking for my thing. I've been out the street now for, like I said, 2 years and change. I'm still looking for my thing. I'm still looking for what I'm going to do. You know, which is what my partner asked me when I called him that day. I called him and said, "Yo, I'm done. I'm finished. Keep everything. I'm good." And he said, "What you going to do?" And I said, "I got no idea, but I'm going to be still." As many of the books that I'm reading are implying, including Ian Van Zant's Spirit of a Man, which was a major impact on me, a major impact on me. Um, I'm going to be still and let it find me. In the streets, you don't get to be still. Not mentally, not physically. You don't get to be still until you're dead or incarcerated. So this, it just was like, this is it. This is what everything up until now has been about. This is what I'm supposed to do. The rest is history, you know. So I would go on to write pretty much every article, um, take every picture, do all the distribution myself because distributors wanted too much for too little, right? Because you're supposed to make all your money in your magazine from your ads. So you basically make your profit before you even print it. But that's not what we had going on because one, I didn't have no idea what I was doing. I didn't even know I was supposed to have ads. I personally hated ads in magazines. I just wanted the content, but I did not understand that that's where the money was until Russell Simmons said to me, Cavario, man, you got a cool magazine, man, but you got to get some ads in here, man. That's where the money's at, man. You get the money, right? Pretty good, Russell. I know Russell a long time. I knew Russell used to buy cocaine from me in '82 in Disco Fever in the Bronx. Another story. But so it evolved from that. It came from that, and I loved it. Uh, I loved the freedom of it. It was the first legitimate endeavor that I'd ever been involved in my life. It was the first time that I felt it was okay for me to be and display as myself at my absolute best, as opposed to in the street. In the street, you you gotta know how to keep your head down, right? Because you can't show off for the niggas and the bitches and somehow be obscured from the feds and police. If the niggas and the bitches see you, the feds see you, police see you, right? And that's not how you win. My mother taught me as a very young child, this is your business, not your business. She said, if you want to be famous, write a book. She literally said that to me. And there was no idea of me writing a book when she said that to me. She said, I might have been like 9, 10 years old, you know? So in the street, no matter how good I was at what I did or how successful I was, I always played myself down, you know? So when Motherfuckers see me in fur coats, all that other shit, whatever, whatever. Um, if the fur coat was waist length, I had full length money, but I bought a waist length coat. If my gators were 500, I had money to buy $1,000 gators. But I'm moderate, at least in my mind, even though I'm 15, 14, 16 years old and no child dresses this way. But because of my exposure and the way I was enveloped in my exposure, I don't really understand that I'm doing something at my age that normal kids don't do. Thus, I'm way more exposed than I think I am, right? But the general idea was keep a low profile. Once I got into the magazine business, I could express the true degree of not my vanity, but my proficiency. I didn't have to play down my success because there were no consequences for it. In fact, there were benefits to it. And it was a level of freedom I'd never experienced before. So for that, I loved it as well. You know, Aside from being able to create something that didn't relegate me to a limited clientele, like so many people use drugs. Everybody reads, everybody likes magazines and pictures. I could sell this anywhere. And I did. I sold that magazine at 4 o'clock in the morning in a rural Virginia gas station to a middle-aged Chinese woman. It gave me the opportunity to really expand myself, you know. That is, that was the crux of it for me. It gave me the ability to live, to express, to be in a way that my previous endeavors had not. So that's pretty much, how it all really came into being. And I started with my ex. We had been um, separated for 2 years prior to the advent of creating Don Diva Magazine. So it was her, myself, and another young lady who was a friend of ours, named Susan Hampstead. It's the three of us, and we created. I made up the name, um, for the entertainment company, whatever, whatever. And so I made up Don Diva Entertainment. And, I mean, it just meant, Don's a man at the top of his game, Diva, woman at the top of her game. Not rocket science. What I mean? It's just that no one else had ever put the two terms together in that way and made them a single term, Don Diva. You know, yeah, I mean, the rest pretty much history. This is actually the Don Diva book, Old Gangsters and Young Guns. It's the Don Diva book. That's the top 10 stories that I did in Don Diva. So this book encompasses the main things of the life. So this book, the stories in this book, um, display the greatest degree of violence, the greatest degree of materialism, the greatest degree of organizational skills and implementation, the greatest degree of betrayal, like all the things that are part of the street existence. Each of the stories in that book, they epitomize those conditions. So the real paid in full story is in there because I know everybody. I knew Donnell, Richard Porter's little brother, knew Richard, who I didn't know his uncle that kidnapped him because he was a junkie and I fucking know he wasn't one of my customers. I didn't know, but I knew Preacher and Preacher's crew. Jack Frost, his main lieutenant. All the guys who was down with him, running around doing what they were doing. All that. I knew everybody. Whole. So I knew the story in a way because I was there. So I knew the story in a way that no other journalist knew it. And anybody who wasn't a journalist wouldn't be able to journalistically convey it in the way that I could, because I am a journalist and a hardcore student. You know what I mean? So I was able to put it out like that. Larry Hoover, I'm the only person who's ever interviewed Larry Hoover. done a story with him, not on him. Um, um, Eport Posse out of New Jersey. Shout out to Sean Hartwell. Um, Boy George out of the Bronx. Um, King Louis of the Latin Kings of Chicago. Um, Fly out of DC. He did 50 years in Lorton Prison out of DC. He came home a couple years ago. 50 years. Akbar Prey, who just came home, my big bro. He's been home now for about maybe 120 days or so. Um, he did 32 years. He's the only super kingpin that I ever knew, like convicted as a super kingpin out of Newark, New Jersey. Um, of course, my crew, Sex, Money, and Murder. And for clarity, so people understand, Sex, Money, and Murder is known to most people as a blood gang. But we existed long before Pete, our partner, he was the youngest out of all of us. Pete brought that blood thing into it. We were already Sex, Money, Murder. We were a collective of drug bosses out of the Bronx. Because born in the Bronx, raised in I was born in Harlem, and we got an apartment in the Bronx when I was about 8. So, from that point forth, I'm Harlem Bronx. So Sex, Money, and Murder, we were guys who, we were BMF before BMF, you know, and only unlike we were more, honestly, we were more violent than BMF. You know what I mean? And it was different times. You know what I mean? Like they were different times at that time. But we did all the thing, all the cars and the jury and the bowling and all that. We did all that shit. Sex, money. That's what we was on. And and also, of course, because you probably know I'm BMF affiliate, right? So Meech is one of my dearest, closest friends. And, so of course that story is in Old Gangsters and Young Guns as well. And the difference between what's in the book and what was the original articles that were written and published in the publications at the time when they came out. The publications in the magazine, an article has to be edited down to its bare essentials. You can't give up the degree of detail that you can in a book because it's with so much space that can be allocated to a single story. A magazine consists of a bunch of different things, a bunch of different articles about different things. So you can't really tell the true or the in-depth detailed story. You have to kind of give like an overarching kind of thing with a couple of highlights to keep people's interest or whatever. So a lot doesn't get said. And the problem with telling these kinds of stories and not being able to get into the minutia, into the details of it, is that it leaves room for misunderstanding and misinterpretation. And then people go out and do what they think they should be doing, and in a way that they shouldn't be doing it because they didn't get the details. You dig? They got, okay, get drugs, get money, get gun to protect money, and don't get caught. Got it? No, you don't got it. You don't got it. Those are not the details, bro. Those are the overarching things. The stuff in between, get money, get drugs, get gun to protect money and drugs, stay alive, healthy, and free. In between, that's the game.
Yeah, yeah. I appreciate you breaking everything down, King. We're about an hour in, so before I get up out of here, I want to thank you again so much because Don Diva is definitely a staple in hip hop, and you've contributed more than that. I really appreciate all the work that you have done up until this point, and I definitely look forward to the work that you have coming in the future. So before we bounce up out of here, for the viewers who do want to check out the books that you have. They do want to check out the Mind Plug Academy and utilize the services that you offer. What's the best way for them to keep up with what you're doing? Is it a website or social media?
So my website is www.themindplugacademy at .com. .com. Themindplugacademy.com. Social media, Cavario _the_mind_plug. So Cavario the mind plug.
Okay. So like I say, it's definitely been an honor. I know we had a couple hiccups. I'll definitely edit it, and then once it's available, I'll send you the link. So it'll just probably be a couple days before I get it to you.
Excellent, brother. Looking forward to it.
Likewise. Take care and be safe out there, King.
All right, you too, bro.
Yeah.
Peace.